and and welcome to Meet the Author. My name's Roland Dupre, and I have here Sam Taylor, who wrote a book called We Are the Fire. And it's a YA fantasy book. I enjoy reading YA sci-fi fantasy books. And this was really a dynamic book with a lot of fast-paced action. And Sam will tell us more about it. Go ahead, Sam.
Awesome. So this is my first published novel, We Are the Fire. Came out in February of 2021. And it is a YA fantasy, so primarily for the teenage audience, though I think the older teenage audience, and I think it would have a lot of crossover appeal to adults. And it's about two flame-wielding teen soldiers who were kidnapped as children and made to fight for an empire, and now they are rebelling and trying to bring down this empire and get themselves back home. And a lot of people, the most common question is like, what inspired this book? And I tell people I was really angry and I wanted to watch something burn. I had this day job at the time that was run by some pretty corrupt people, and there was a lot of shady business going on, and I hated it, but I didn't know how to fix things. I didn't know what were the right choices to correct this situation. I didn't know who to turn to for help, because like the one person who was in a position to help my team just like wanted nothing to do with it. And so I was like, well, who can help, and how do I make things right? And I'd come home from work like just so angry and so frustrated, and I had always been interested in writing, but at that time writing really became an outlet for me to just vent out some of my frustrations and my anger. And so I came up with the idea for this book, and I was like, well, I want there to be fire magic because I want there to be things that burn. I'm angry. And I didn't want the characters to have been born with this fire magic, and I didn't want it to be something they learned like in a school. I wanted it to be something that was like forced onto them, so they have this power that they didn't choose to have, and they're told how they must use this power. And some of them finally work up the nerve to start pushing back and saying like, no, we're not going to do this anymore. And then throughout the story, the two main characters have different ideas of what freedom looks like. Oksana wants nothing to do with this magic. She's like, I didn't choose this. I want to get rid of it. And she's desperately looking for a way to rid themselves of the fire magic. And she just wants to go back to her quiet farm home and just regain that peaceful life that she grew up knowing and that she just wants to get back to. Prawn, the other main character, we got Oksana here, and then Prawn, he's like, I didn't choose this power, but I have it now, and I want to choose how to use it. I want to use this fire magic to defend my own homeland, to defend the people who mean the most to me. And he is determined to find a way to get themselves free. And so in addition to like different visions of freedom, they also have different lines they're willing to cross to get to their freedom. They both have to argue with each other and with themselves. What are they willing to do for the sake of freedom? How much are they, like, how much are they willing to fight for it, and who are they willing to fight with? And, what will they give up for their vision of freedom? So I came up with a lot of different folklore for this book. I love playing with folklore in my writing. This one is a little bit unique in that I just created a lot of the folklore for it. And some of my upcoming projects I'm drawing from existing folklore, primarily like Nordic and Scandinavian folklore. But yeah, I just had a lot of fun coming up with folklore and just really digging into difficult questions. Like I didn't hold back in this book. It didn't feel like that was the right thing to do for the story I was trying to tell, or like the older teen readers who are dealing with a lot of difficult questions in their own lives, and questions I'd been grappling too, like what do you do when you want to do the right thing but you don't know what that right thing is, or what do you do when the right choice comes with some pretty steep consequences, because sometimes it does. And then how can you end up working together and aligning with like some unpredictable people that maybe you would never have seen yourself working with, but you end up coming together and finding joint causes and making some amazing things happen. I mean, ultimately, I wanted the book to end with hope, because I feel that that's very important for young readers, especially now.
Mhm. Yeah, I was impressed with that there was, I mean, there was so much fast-paced action and so many battles and so many fight scenes. I mean, I just was so impressed with all of that action. And then coming home at
Yeah.
the end, when, I mean, they've been really, just horrible, those choices they've had. Yeah.
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 Thank you. Yeah, thank you for explaining it in a different way, because I was just enjoying the story. I wasn't looking at like the background and everything.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this story went through many different versions. I've worked on it for a long time to really kind of figure out what it was I was trying to say and
Mm.
do so in the most impactful way possible.
You talk about it being, derived from this one experience that you had. That's what inspired it. But then, I mean, there must have been a lot of other inspirations about it.
Yeah, I really got into alchemy and alchemical research. It was really fascinating to me. And then, in this book, I put a different spin on it, because in our world, they're trying to like turn metals into gold or find the philosopher's stone that would create the elixir of life. And in this alchemy, they're they're looking for firepower. They're looking to turn normal people into like these fire wielding demons. So that was fun to play with. The demon's tongue chemical weapon that they have in the book, that was inspired by the ancient Greek fire, which is like this ancient weapon that people still don't know how it was created, but it was fire that could burn on water. And the Greek armies could like take out like ships on naval battles and just like decimate their enemies with this fire that could burn on water. And I was like,
Wow.
how cool is that? I gotta have that in this story, obviously.
Yeah.
um
But it backfires. It really does in the scene that they light the water on fire, and what the
yeah,
expected outcome is doesn't happen. It's worse,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah,
But I
yeah.
never knew that about the Greek. I never knew that.
Yeah,
That's
that was just something I stumbled across in some of my chemistry research for this book. And that was just like kind of a footnote in the chemistry research. And I was like, whoa, this is perfect for my book. So that's how a lot of my writing works, is I'll have like the general idea, but then I will always like research and brainstorm, and I'll even put together an outline, because I have to have some idea in my mind of where I'm going. But the very first like rough draft, I'll call it like draft 0, is like I call it the reality check for my outline, because no matter how much prep work I do, and I'll be like, yeah, I really figured this story out, I know exactly what I need to write and where it's going. Usually once I get to like about the first third or middle of the book, I'm like, something's not working. But it's like once so I'll have my general idea, like the map in my head of, oh, okay, this is where the story is going to go. But once I get into like, the real footpaths of walking through like this world and walking with these characters and going through their story, better ideas always come to me. And sometimes that's through like additional research. Sometimes it's through questions that spring up to me as I'm writing. But better ideas always come as I'm like actually working through the real world of the story. And in those early drafts, especially, I give myself the permission to go off script and explore those other ideas, because that's where my best ideas come from. Like, believe it or not, for this book, Rotare, the alchemist, he was not part of the original idea. I came up with him about halfway through the original first draft for the story. Now you look at it and it's like, how did I plan to tell this story without him? I don't know.
Yeah, that is an amazing thing that you were able to do. And it boggles my mind that you had a plan, a general plan, but descending into the story yourself and walking into that world and kind of creating the pathways of those characters and what they do and how they, I mean, that has to be a little crazy making, because you're in a different world and you have to really sublimate your own self to understand that world. Was that, oh, that was
Yeah,
fun? Was it fun?
it drafting is not my favorite part of the process. Like the first draft, it's very hard work. It is very hard to build a book from a blank page. And even though like I do my homework and I do the outline and the brainstorming, it's just very hard because I'll get through it and I'll realize like something's not working, like this world building is incomplete, or the character motivations need to be better developed, or these plot events just aren't quite lining up. And sometimes like people can just kind of breeze past that and just keep going to the end, and like that's just not the way my brain wants to work. So I call those first drafts draft zeros, because I've gotten better at like pausing, and I'll leave notes for myself. Sometimes like I'll make bracketed notes in the text and then highlight them yellow so they're easy to find. And sometimes I'll just like do comment bubbles to myself, and I'll just like free write, and with like my questions, and I'll be like, whether it's some character backstory I need to better develop, or an idea that came to me for a character backstory. I'll jot down my concerns, or I'll jot down loose ideas that are coming to me as I'm writing, and I'll just make a note of those and put them aside. So then when that messy first draft is complete, and it's full of like what I had planned to write and ideas of things I need to explore more in revision, or even just where I started like veering completely off. And sometimes a better idea will come to me, and I'll just continue writing the book as if that better idea had been the idea all along, knowing that when it's time for revision, I got to go back to the first chunk and fix everything. But
That's gotta be
yeah,
hard. That's gotta be hard to do all those edits on your own. And how do you keep track of all that? I mean, or do you go basically because you're starting from the beginning over and over and over again? I mean, do you get one chunk? But no, you're telling me that you can go back to the beginning and put in a new
yeah,
character.
it kind of varies depending on like how different the new ideas came to me are. Like my very first drafts are for my eyes only, and that way like I just really have that freedom to explore the story, explore the world and the characters, and I don't have to worry about it making sense to anyone else. Then I'll do a revision, like my proper draft one, and get everything cleaned up according to all my notes. Sometimes I just go through linearly from start to finish, or I'll like if it's bigger chunks that need working on, maybe like there's one section that is in pretty good shape, but there's other things like I'll move around if I need to like do a rewrite based on like just cleaning up the characters, and then I might do another one connecting the dots on the plot, and then like another one on like I'll do different passes through one revision and just kind of like tackle that proper, like, cleaned up first draft is when I send it to my critique partners. I have several critique partners that I've connected with just over the years, some of them through my Writers Association, some of them I've met online, like through Twitter. And so I'll send it to usually 2 or 3 trusted critique partners, get their feedback, do another round of revision based on their suggestions. Then I'll send it to some different critique partners just to, like, keep getting that variety of eyes on the page. And then do another revision based on the second round of readers' feedback. At that point, I can usually take it to my agent and get my agent's input on the story.
And
And then
this
I
is your first book and you have an agent.
Yes,
Kind of cool.
although I didn't have an agent for this book, I ended up getting the agent after I got this book deal.
Mhm.
Because it was a little bit of a unique situation with the deal for We Are the Fire.
Yeah, I
But
see.
now,
It's great. It's a Macmillan book, no? Or
yes,
do you could you tell just shortly the story of how that happened? I mean, that's incredible.
sure. Yes, so Swoon Reads was, and unfortunately was an imprint through Macmillan, one of the big 5 or 4 publishers.
I know.
And it was, Swoon Reads was spearheaded by the head of another imprint under Macmillan. And so they created an opportunity for aspiring authors to load their completed YA manuscripts onto the website, and then a community of readers could go sift through the manuscripts that were loaded to that site and read them, rate them, reviews. Manuscripts that received like high ratings and reviews on that website would get the attention of the editors. And then from there, the editors would choose a small selection of manuscripts every quarter, usually like 2 to 4 manuscripts that they would decide to then go on and publish traditionally. And I'd been trying to get an agent for this book, and it wasn't happening still. This was the 3rd manuscript I had queried to agents. And I loved all my books that I write. You kind of have to if you're going to be spending months or years working on a book. But this one felt different to me from the start. And I had a passion for this book that I hadn't quite lit up in me for the first 2 ones I'd sent out. And my early readers for this one, they're like, this is it. This is going to be the one. And I was like, I sure hope so. But agents just weren't feeling that way. And I was like, well, I really want to try to give this book a shot. And I heard about Swoon Reads, and I was like, you know what? This book does really well with readers. So maybe readers can help me get it published. And it happened. Swoon Reads has unfortunately since gone under and is no longer operating as a publisher.
I went online. I did go online, and they still have a website, but they're
it's
not
connected. It's connected through the Fierce Reads website, which is kind of like Macmillan's arm for marketing their all of the YA books under the Macmillan umbrella. So yeah, this, I believe, as of last month, they released the last books under the Swoon Reads imprint. So yeah, so unfortunately that was the end of that. I did just a few weeks ago get to announce that I am having another book published with a different publisher, and got it all through the usual channels with my agent taking the book on sub. And so that will be a middle grade fantasy inspired by Norwegian folklore. So
Oh, wow, that's exciting. I love
yeah.
Norwegian folklore.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I have a long, long line of Norwegian ancestry. So like this book was kind of my like pandemic project, and it was nice to like reconnect with those roots and just kind of learn a little bit more about that heritage, and then just lose myself in a Norwegian forest with folklore creatures and having some kids go on a wild adventure. Like,
Can you give us a hint of what kind of creatures there are in Norwegian?
oh, sure.
folklore?
So the book is called Madsy the True. It's coming out with Athenaeum in 2 years, fall 2024, and it starts with Northern Lights folklore, especially with the idea that if you like sneak out and are spying on the lights and disrespecting them, they'll snatch you away. And the main character, her oldest sister, who was a little bit of a rebel, she snuck out and then on a night when the lights were out, and she never came back home. And so a year later, when the lights come back, her sister, the main character, she's going out and she's yelling at the lights, and she's like, "You need to give back my sister." And the lights drop a girl to the ground, but it's not her older sister. It's another girl who was very happy to be staying in the lights and says, you better put me back there. You need to find a witch who can put me back up in the sky. So they go off in search of a witch with the annoying neighbor boy who loves adventure following them along. And they meet a Gjenganger, uh, like Viking zombie type being in a Viking graveyard, and they meet a Nisa, like a little, this is a forest Nisa, like a little tiny, like old man looking creature who takes care of the forest and the animals. They meet a forest troll, and they have to outsmart him before he eats them. And they meet a Huldra, kind of like the supposedly seductive, like forest demon woman. And then they also they connect up with some children from a Sami tribe, the indigenous people of Scandinavia, and then they end up having to fight a Sami monster, a Stalo, and with the help of the Sami children. And then at the end, they face a Jotun, or the Nordic giant creature, and have to fight like the old Viking creature.
So it's another fast-paced, action-filled novel.
Yep, yep, yep.
That's great. I
Yeah,
mean, it's hard to do too, I think.
yeah, yeah. That story was just, it was so fun to dive in. It was my first middle grade project ever, and I just loved it. And I had so much fun writing that I would have to make myself stop working on it, because like sometimes you actually have to do laundry or make dinner. But I just really enjoyed that one. I decided to try my hand at middle grade during the pandemic because I'd only ever written YA for teenagers, but all of my YA turns out really dark, like even if that's not the plan. And in 2020, on top of the pandemic, I had a little baby boy who was born with Down syndrome and a heart defect that required surgery. And there's just so much heavy stuff going on already that I was like, I need to write something lighter, or I'm just going to lose myself in all of this worry. So I was like, I'm going to try writing middle grade, because that will push me to be more whimsical and more lighthearted. And I wasn't sure if I could do it, but I dove into it, and I loved it. So
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, that is something when you feel like when you're going through traumatic events or something, is that a release for you to write something, to enter into another world? Does that help you?
Absolutely, because especially during the pandemic, when it was like, there was just so many things that were out of my hands, and I needed writing more than ever, because it was like, I can't end the pandemic. I can't fix the holes in my baby's heart, but I can fix this story.
Mm.
And so I sometimes, usually, like all of my stories end up being like drawn out of like something that's troubling me in my life, or some questions that are really eating at me. Even, even this one, which is much more whimsical and lighthearted in tone, I was dealing with all the feelings of the pandemic and everything that was going on with my baby boy, and just like the grief and the loss and the sense of like trying to seek some control in your life. So, Madsy, she's lost her sister. She desperately wants her sister back. Her family is miserable without the sister, and she's like, I'm gonna make this right. She also feels guilty because she and her sister had a fight right before the sister went out to look at the lights, and the older sister was trying to get Madsy to come, and Madsy's like, no, that's against the rules, and I'm scared, and it's cold outside. And and then she was mad at her sister, and her sister was like, oh, stop being such a chicken baby. And she's like, you need to be more responsible. She's like, you're always breaking the rules, and mom and dad are always mad, and I have to be the good girl, and I don't even want to. And, so like she has this guilt of like thinking she sent her sister out into the storm, and she's the reason her sister's lost.
Yeah, and that happens a lot with siblings, I think, don't you? I mean, that
Oh yeah.
there's this sort of, oh my God, I lost her. Oh, whoa. What did I
Yeah.
do to my sister? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Scary.
siblings, it's like you're each other's best friends and like biggest enemies and rivals. Like,
It's very true.
because they're always there.
So,
I have a,
go
oh,
ahead, Ruth, you have a
I
question?
have a few questions for you. Yeah.
Yes.
I more or less wanted to know, first of all, how many books do you have out there already?
This is the only one that is currently out. And next fall, I have a short story in an anthology, Being Ace, about a collection of stories by asexual spectrum authors. And then in 2 years, I have Madsy the True. But this is the one that's currently out right now.
But
Okay.
you've been
And
writing
so
ever
my
since.
next,
Go ahead,
oh,
Ruth,
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
My next question was, how long did it take you to put the book together?
We Are the Fire, I wrote over a period of about 3 years. That wasn't the only book I was writing at the time, because I'll do a revision of one project, and then while that's off being looked at by readers, I'll write a different project in the meantime. So it wasn't the only book I was working on during those 3 years, but it did take about 3 years from the time I started working on it to the time I got the publication offer. I do seem to be getting a bit faster now.
And do you have a lot of books or projects that you've worked on that you can kind of go back to or?
I have a couple before We Are the Fire that I probably won't be going back to. They're more like practice books. I have 2 I wrote after We Are the Fire. One my agent took on sub during the pandemic. That one has not found a home yet. I think we just haven't come across the right editor, so we're both hopeful that that book will find a home. And my agent wasn't feeling the second one I wrote so much. I'm still hoping that that one will also find a home. And then I wrote Madsy the True. And I'm currently, right now, I'm working on a picture book with my agent, because I'm apparently just all over the place. I'm also working on my first ever novel for adults. I never ever thought I would be writing a book for adults, but here I am. Came up with another idea for a story, also inspired by folklore, by changeling folklore. And so here I am working on a book for adults, and then I'm also trying to go back to yet another project that I had wrote in the very early days of the pandemic, and I haven't gotten a chance to go back to it yet. So I'm trying to do that now because I'm feeling called to that book. So I always, lots of different pans on the stove.
Wow. And when did you start, know that you would be a writer?
When I was a teenager, I knew that that was what I wanted to do, and I studied writing in college. I didn't get really serious about like getting books put together and sending them out to agents and editors for publishing until about 10 years ago. And it took, let's see, it took about 6 years from the time I was seriously like, it's like, okay, I'm gonna make this happen. It was about 6 years from that time until when I got the publication offer for We Are the Fire. So, which is very typical. There's years and years of work behind, the scenes, especially when you're going into traditional publishing.
Mhm. Have you ever self-published at all?
I have not, because like, especially with the kidlit projects, it just seems like market wise for like the books to really get out there, like it's best for them to be traditionally published. Now, my adult manuscript that I'm working on, that is one that I would very much consider self-publishing if it was not able to find a home in traditional publishing, because I think there's a little more room for like success in self-publishing for adults, and that's just a story that means a lot to me personally, because the Changeling folklore, I was reading a description in folklore of what was said to be a changeling child, and I was like, this sounds like a kid with Down syndrome. And I was like, I want to explore that in a story. I want to write that story. So I'm writing it as historical fantasy. And ultimately, this is the kind of book I wish I could have been reading in the months, in between getting his diagnosis prenatally and him being born. Because it was just a very, very difficult time. I don't do well with uncertainty. So it's the kind of book that I wish I would have had, and that is one where it's like, if traditional publishing like doesn't want to give it a home, then I would give it a home, because
Yeah.
that's a book that I really want to see out there one way or another.
And you've identified the people who would read it, the people
Yeah.
who had your experiences.
Yeah. I mean, like anyone, who has a child with Down syndrome or knows someone, or even it's steeped in like Icelandic folklore and history. So I mean, anyone who loves Icelandic folklore, Icelandic history, there's a volcano eruption in the book, lots lots of action.
That's
Oh,
great. Obviously, action, I'm so, in fact, I was thinking she must have had martial arts or something.
oh,
Because some of the descriptions are like, whoa, that's really exact. I mean, it's so, I could see it on the screen. It's a movie
yeah,
we made, yeah. So
yeah.
just so you know, we're about 7 minutes before 7.
Okay.
Is there anything else? Ruth, do you have more questions?
Um, I more or less just wanted to know how, I guess she answered the question when she indicated that you were writing and when you were younger, and I guess that's what inspired you to do your stories. Um, I I might be leaning and hopefully writing my story one day. I just didn't know what it takes to be an author and to know who your audience is going to be, who your readers are going to be, who you're going to direct the book to, and all the basic questions that one can have. And I just didn't know how long it would take to write a book as well, because you indicated that you started from draft zero and then
Yeah.
would edit and do all that good stuff. Um, and I know that's time consuming um, for you to have to put a book together. If you indicated that it took 3 years, um, I'm sure that you had to, put your time into it.
Yeah.
Were you a mom before when you started your first book? Were you a full-time worker? Like, did you have all that going on and you dedicated yourself to the book as well?
Yes. When I because when I was saying 10 years ago, when I decided I'm going to make this happen, I was working full time. My husband was in graduate school at that time getting his PhD. So I was the one supporting us financially. So I, had to do my full-time job. And at that time, I made a goal that I would write 1,000 words a day on the book I was working on. And it can sound like a lot, but when you really like get into, a rhythm, and especially like if you take the time beforehand to like kind of plan out the scene that you're gonna write, like, have clear in your mind, like this is the scene I need to write for that day. This is what needs to happen next. And you take time to think beforehand. I was surprised at how quickly I could knock out those words, even while working a full-time job. I would sometimes like work on my story a bit on my lunch break, and I could get 500 words out then. I would work on it in the evening after work, and sometimes could like quite easily get the rest of those words. That was the very frustrating job that I had at the time. So like the writing was the thing I looked forward to. Like it was my release. I was like, oh, I need this to wind down after what I had to put up with today. But yeah, I made that goal that I would write 1,000 words today and just try to squeeze it in around the job. I am a mom now. My kids are 4, he'll be 5 at the end of the year, and 2. And ever since I became a parent, and writing time is even more precious. What I've been doing, and it's very tough, but I get up at 5 a.m. before the kids are awake, and I get some words written. And the youngest is still young enough to nap, but when they're both young enough to nap, like that was also my writing time. And I kept them on really, really strict like napping schedules, just because just to maintain that habit in them, because that was my working time and I needed that time to myself to just have moments to be me and to get my stories down. And so that's basically how I've been going along since my kids were born, is getting up at 5 a.m., getting some words in before they're awake, and then writing during nap time. It can be very tough, and it does take commitment. It takes treating it like a job before it really is a job. In order to get a book out there, whether it's traditionally published or whether it's self-published, like it takes commitment to making it happen, but it absolutely can be done. I mean, I have friends who have even more chaos going on in their lives, and they'll set a goal like 500 words a day, 250 words a day. It adds up, and you will have a book in your hands before long. You just have to make the commitment, and then you have to honor that time and protect that time, whatever it is you've decided on. It can be easy to let other things infringe on that time, but if you protect that time, you give yourself the space to write your stories, because your voice is important and your stories are needed. And it doesn't take 8 hours a day to get a book created. Like you can get a book created with the time you have.
So can I interrupt, because
Sure.
you said these books and these stories are needed. Tell us more about that. Why are they needed?
Like everyone has so many different perspectives and experiences, and only you can tell them like in your own unique voice, in your own unique style. And there's always someone out there who needs what you have to say, is what my cat is.
Yeah, I see your cat. He's fire colored.
He was a fire colored cat. Yeah, there's just, when people are writing like really honestly from their hearts, even stories, that sometimes get dismissed, humorous stories, romance stories, people still need them. Different stories speak to different people. Sometimes you want a lighthearted read, sometimes you just want to laugh, sometimes you want a love story, sometimes you want something really fierce. But there's so many people out there who have different needs for stories, and so many different authors telling their stories in different ways. And whether it's a really, serious topic book, or whether it is a romantic comedy, there's going to be someone out there who needs that story. And, none of these stories get written without authors and writers taking the time to sit down and make it, carving out that time, making small sacrifices, big sacrifices, but allowing themselves the time for their voice to be heard, and then sharing it with other people. You definitely got to start like by sharing with a writers group. I found, as I mentioned, some of mine through my writers association, the Society for Children's Books Writers and Illustrators. I also found some on Twitter, on writer Twitter. Getting people that you trust to give informed opinions, informed and honest, like constructive criticism. I've had some people who gave very mean feedback on my work, like unnecessarily mean, and to the point where I was like, I can't trust you with my stories anymore because you're just tearing them down. You're not helping me make them better. So you find trusted people who can give you the feedback that will get your work to the next level. And, from there, you can look for an agent if you want to pursue the traditional publishing, or look for a freelance editor to help you get the book into better shape if you want to pursue self-publishing. Both are very valid routes for getting your words out into the world.
Now I have another question.
Sure.
So for you to be called an author, what exactly do you have to do? Like, do you have a story that you present to um, publishers where they can say, okay, you're definitely an author? Because I mean, anyone can put something together and perhaps they don't have what it takes to be an author.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what did you, how did you go about with pursuing the fact that yes, you are an author and yes, you can publish a book?
I mean, like, the who gets to call themselves an author is honestly kind of subjective. I've seen some people say you need to be published, whether that's traditional published or self-publishing. Um, I don't know, but I mean, how I went about it was, I did want to pursue traditional publishing, and tried getting an agent for first few manuscripts. Didn't work out. So then I found this kind of backdoor route to getting myself in with a big traditional publisher. And yeah, their editors said, like, this book shows potential. It seems marketable. Like, it was of enough quality and appeal that they decided that they wanted to offer me an official contract and pay me money. And then with my fourth so We Are the Fire was my third manuscript. With my fourth manuscript, that was when I got an agent. And she was saying, like, the story, like, had like the strong characterization, the compelling characterization to make her feel like this is a project that she could read again and again and again, and work with me on it through some revisions and confidently present it to editors. It it it's all very subjective, so it's really hard to say, like, this is exactly what you do to like have what it takes to be an author, because it's so subjective, and a lot of it depends on what agents or editors or think is like marketable or is going to make them some decent money. When I would talk with other writer friends, as we were all struggling to find agents or to get book deals, like, we agreed there's definitely like a threshold of craft that it seems writers need to achieve before they're picked up by agents or picked up by editors. And there's no way, like, there's unfortunately not like, a clear definition of like, do these 5 things and you'll be at that threshold. Because again, it is subjective. It comes from, lots of writing, reading like, some good writing craft books, getting lots of feedback from fellow writers and giving feedback to them. Giving feedback on other people's work is another really effective way to like level up your craft skills, because you can see in other people's stories like, oh, this isn't what's working, this isn't what's working. So it takes time, and lots of practice, lots of connecting with other people. Some people can go from writer like alone in their room working on a story in their desk to like being a published author pretty quickly. For some people, it takes even longer than it took me. It just ultimately, you have to connect with the right person with the right story at the right time. So there is like a threshold of craft where you get to a certain point and it's like your work is publishable, but then you have to find that agent and that editor who can champion your story, and that's really about luck. Once you get to a certain threshold, it's really about luck.
Mm.
Now, did you present your entire story to these editors at the time? Um,
Yes.
because I know sometimes you want to just share like bits and pieces, like you don't want to share everything because you want to share it all when the book is finally out, and you have the whole entire story out. Um, did you share like did you have to share the whole entire story with them for them to like for you to like for them to say, okay, this is definitely a good story, we're
Yes.
gonna go with it, we're gonna publish it?
Yes. When you're querying agents, you usually start by just sending like the first chapter or so. It kind of varies by agent, but you always need to have the whole manuscript written and revised, polished, and complete. Because when you're querying agents, if they read your first chapter and they like it, they're going to want to see the rest of the manuscript and they're going to want to see it soon. So before reaching out to any agents, you need to have your whole book written and revised, gotten feedback on it. It needs to be ready to go, your best work possible, because they need to see everything it is you're capable of. When I loaded the manuscript for We Are the Fire to the Swoon Read site, it was the full manuscript. And it had been revised. It was as polished as I could make it at that time. And then now, while working with my agent, when she sends stories of mine to editors, hoping to land me a book deal, like when we sent out Madsy to editors, the manuscript, it was complete, it was polished. I'd worked on several rounds of revision with my critique partners. Then my agent and I worked on a few more rounds of revision. Like this book was so polished it should shine like the Northern Lights. Because yeah, like the editors themselves also want to see the best work possible. And it paid off because my editor, she told me like, there's a few edits she's going to want me to make on it, but she's like, this manuscript is in pretty good shape. And I was like, well, I sure hope so after all that revision we did on it. So, but
This
yeah.
is exciting. I'm so pleased you were able to talk about this. This is exciting. And the new book too. I mean, that's really cool. Thank you. I think we're coming to the end.
Okay.
Is there anything else that you feel like you want to say?
No, I mean, anyone out there who wants to be writing, like I'd say, go for it and find people who can give you honest and constructive feedback, and just keep going for it. You just keep writing the next story and the next story and keep putting your work out there. And as long as you persist, you will find the agent, the editor, or the readership, if you're self-publishing, who will appreciate those stories and want to put them out in the world. Like, your stories are worth it, so go for it.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
One more question that I have. Once the publishers decided that, yes, this book is going out and so forth, how do they go about where the book is gonna be sold? Like where the book is, like, do they decide, okay, this is good enough to be sold at Barnes and Noble? Or like, how do you go about with that?
They do have a team of, I believe it's the marketing team, who will pitch the books to like salespeople at Barnes and Noble, like salespeople at like big independent bookstores. Barnes and Noble, I think, ultimately makes their own decisions on what they're going to stock and not. But from what I understand, like the publishers, they, try to get it into as many bookstores as possible, and so they'll send out information to the retailers, and then like the retailers each have their own way of deciding what they're going to stock, but the publisher will handle that on their end and let the people know who need to.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording and we can chat.